Hey everybody, this is Craig Garver. Welcome to Everyone Loves Guitar. I got a special guest today. I'm with Jim Oblon, one of the top session players around. Just a great groove, great guitar player, and he's had a great career. But I actually met Jim on the show, I don't know, like maybe 5 years ago. Even.
5 years ago.
Yeah, and I came to Nashville and we hung out. We became buddies ever since. So this is really cool to have my friend on the show again. And Jim's got a great new album called I Want to Be Loved. It's a really cool album Jimmy Reed covers. And what I'm going to do is put Jim's original interview behind this one. So if you missed it the first time around, you can check it out. He's a super cool guy, interesting, bright, all that good stuff, and just a tremendous musician. All right, cliff notes for Jim. Born into a musical family in Connecticut. Started playing professionally at the ripe old age of 12. My cat is, I don't know if you can hear it. Jim's a rare breed because he's a phenomenal guitarist, but he's equally adept at drums. And that's not easy to play at that skill level on two different instruments. Jim's played on 5 Paul Simon albums. He did multiple world tours with Paul Simon, playing guitar, bass, and drums on Paul's 2011 album called So Beautiful or So What, which was produced by Phil Ramone. And he also worked for Phil Ramone as a studio musician, outside of working with Paul. Other sideman activity includes recently touring and performing on Lucinda Williams' latest album, playing on Andrea Zonn's recording called Rise, along with Steve Gadd, Willie Weeks, and Gill. Not a bad cast, as well as records with artists Rodney Crowell, Swamp Dogg, Janis Ian, and others. He released his first solo guitar record in 2014 with the amazing Jim Keltner on drums and Larry Goldings on organ. That was called Sunset on Compass Records. I would check out all of Jim's records, or anywhere you stream. He's got a new one that we'll talk about later. Other virtuosos that have played on Jim's solo records include Robin Ford and pedal steel legend Lloyd Green. And I guess this is a big thing. I should say this now because I see this everywhere. If you know, like Lloyd Green. Do you see that all the time?
No,
IFY. I see that all over.
I don't know that. No.
Yeah, I see that all over. At my advanced age, I try to pick up on anything I can. Other than these special guests, Jim plays all the instruments on all of his solo releases. In total, he's released 5 full-length studio albums, several EPs and singles, and a really cool cover of Where Did You Sleep Last Night, which got picked up as the song running over the end credits on an episode of the HBO series True Blood, and that song blew up as a single.
I think it was actually where that girl was dressed up as Red Riding Hood in the season finale.
Okay. Yeah. Right. I remember that. We used to watch that. That was cool. Yeah. Jim's got a new album, and as I said, it's called I Want to Be Loved. It's an album of cool Jimmy Reed blues covers, and it's a duo record with Jim Oblon and Jim Keltner playing drums, and Jim Oblon's playing everything else. And I'm excited to let you know that Jim Oblon is also the guy who wrote, played, and produced the opening and closing bumper music. If you listen to the podcast on audio, my podcast, Everyone Loves Guitar Talk Show and podcast, that's all Jim's work on there. So I love that. And now we pull back the mask. And again, this is not Jim's first time on the show. I'm going to include his original interview in case you missed it first time around. Jim, this is very awkward having you on the show.
Yeah, well, no, thanks for having me on again to talk about the record. I really appreciate it.
Awkward in a good way. It's like, wait a minute, we just spoke last night.
Yeah, I know.
So before we talk about the new record, I had a couple of questions for you. And
Sure.
For starters, and I don't know how we haven't talked about this, your playing style, you play without a pick. And so how did you develop that? And was like that how you started playing from day one, or?
Well, I studied classical guitar when I was 12 or 13 and kept it up for maybe a couple of years, but I just wasn't disciplined enough for it. I wish I was, looking back on it, but what it did do was I did learn the right hand technique of playing with your fingers, and you have to keep your nails kind of not polished, but you needed to keep up on your nails. And then I played with a pick, and then later on I had seen a picture of Chet Atkins playing, and he had a thumb pick on, and I was like, right, like there's electric guitar players that play with their fingers, and I knew Albert Collins played with his fingers. I'm pretty, Freddie King did with finger picks, although I think he used picks on his index finger too. you know,
Just
like
yeah, just his index finger. It was like his thumb and index finger.
thumb and index finger. And then, so I don't know how many blues guys, you know, used the thumb picks, but so many of them played with their fingers. And I just thought, oh, you know, I played classical guitar and like, I went to a store, bought a thumb pick, and then I kind of just liked the way it felt, honestly, you know, and how it started out is I would just play stock licks that I was already playing, slow them down, and just, you know, figure out the fingering. And then over time, that became my playing style. And I don't really play with a flat pick that much. Sometimes I do, but it's pretty basic. You know, it's like sometimes when I want to maybe slow myself down a little bit, I'll play with a flat pick. And so that's basically how that technique came about. And it happened over the course of like 10 or 15 years where I didn't think about like, oh, I'm switching it. It just, this is how I started to play, you know? So that's how it came about.
That's really cool. And I love, because Jim's got some really cool videos on YouTube on his channel, so you should definitely check them out. But, you know, that one video of you with the Epiphone always comes to mind. It's so...
Oh, yeah, with the trio in that studio in Nashville. Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah.
That's a great one. The music is so good. And I'm just watching you play with that, and I was like, wow, that just looks so cool. And it just, you know, it sounds great. So,
yeah, thank you.
Oh, you're welcome, man. You're very melodic, both in your compositions and in your playing. But when it's appropriate, you really do let it rip. And I don't want to call it shredding, because to me, shredding implies the focus is on the technique, right? But there are plenty of times, you know, say the outro of a song, for example, where you're going to take the solo and it's blazing, but it's melodic. Like I could hum your and I could hum your solos. I'd want to sit down and like figure them out on myself, you know? But I was curious, how do you play again with a pick that fast? It's almost like, I don't know, like the eighth wonder of the world or something.
Well, it's like, I almost call it like fake fast, because it's like Yngwie Malmsteen. I was listening to his record the other day. I know guys are like split on him, but I like him, you know, like that first record, what is it? Rising Force or something like that, with the Strat coming out of the flames. And I mean that, you know, he's doing like alternate picking and playing fast, but really I feel like when I play fast, you're splitting up everything. So I'm doing a lot of hammers on and a lot of pull offs, and then I'm not playing everything with one finger. So I might play one note with my thumb, pull off two notes in my left hand, then hit another note with my index finger. So it's almost like if you play a single stroke roll and you alternate left, right, left, right, left, right, and you do it as fast as you can, it sounds fast, but if you take away one hand, it's half as fast, if that makes sense.
So you're using your other fingers, but still like, it's hard to do, man, because then you got the timing is
right. Well, but it really is like split up. The responsibilities are split up. So it's never like, it's, you know, and I feel like it happens in bursts. Like, you know, some guys can just, you know, and that like never stop. I feel like I have like short bursts of maybe some machine gun fire, and then I got to go back to single shots or something like that. So I mean, it sounds fast, but I think if like, again, sitting there, like in my mind, how I'm splitting it up, nothing is working that hard, if that makes sense, you know, because of the hammers on, the pull offs, you know, and then I'm hitting the different notes with 3 different fingers. So it's, you know what I mean? It's not even like I'm alternating that fast between my thumb and my index finger. You know, I can only get so fast with that. So you know what I'm saying? It might sound a little fast, you know, it's just split up. The responsibility is split up, if that makes sense at all. Kind of crazy to talk about, you know, responsibility in your hands.
No, but it makes sense, but it's just sounds great, and it seems impossible to do for someone like me. I'm just like looking at it. You know, making an album isn't easy, especially nowadays, as everybody knows. What was your motivation to put another record out?
I'll be honest with you, I didn't necessarily want to, but the one thing that I had always wanted to do was record with Jim Keltner one more time. And, you know, we had made a record in 2012, and it was released in 2014. I always meant to do something else with him. And right around when the pandemic hit, I was going to do something with him, and I was like, yeah, now's the time. And then that got delayed, obviously for 3 years. But the other thing that happened is I kind of developed this thing called the Monochord, which is a Telecaster. I put a bass string on it and heavy jazz strings. It's tuned to an open chord. The lowest note is like a low G on a bass. And then it has separate outputs. The neck output goes to a bass amp. The bridge pickup goes to, or I should say the neck pickup goes to a bass amp. The bridge pickup goes to a distorted guitar amp. And basically, if everybody remembers Bo Diddley's original hit, that Bo Diddley thing, he played in an open G, and you didn't really hear the bass that much on it. And so to me, it was like a updated version of Bo Diddley, but only down an octave. So it was meant to be just this riff machine where you don't play it like a bass or a guitar. You just, every time you play a chord, you're just playing it with your index finger, and then let's say you need to go to the 4 chord in a blues, then you just slide up to the 4 chord. And so I had been messing around with that, and I thought, oh wow, why not make an album of like old blues covers with that sound? And basically, I'd never made a strict blues record before. And what's cool about Jim Keltner is that everybody knows him for the sort of rock and roll royalty. Bob Dylan, John Lennon, played the drums with the Traveling Wilburys, and you name it, just top LA session guy. But also, I was like looking at his discography, and it's like played with Freddie King, B.B. King, Albert King. He's on that record Lovejoy with the Bus. That's my favorite Albert King record.
Albert King record, yeah.
Yeah, played with Gatemouth Brown, John Lee Hooker. I mean, it's just
I didn't know
like,
he was so deep in the blues.
It's like all my favorite blues. I think he even played on a record with Albert Collins also. So he's like, not only is he known for like rock and roll royalty, but actually, Buddy Guy, he played with Buddy Guy too. So it's like blues royalty also. You know what I mean? In a way. And he was on my favorite Clapton record, that record From the Cradle. I think that was released in the 90s. And that's Jim Keltner on that. So really, it was like, okay, the main motivation is, boy, I'd love to record with Keltner. But then the question was, what would the project be? And then because I developed this thing, I call it the Monochord. And then it was almost like I wanted to take all the elements that I liked about the blues and include it in this album. Obviously, the album, I never thought of like setting the world on fire or making any money. This is a complete labor of love, where it was almost like I just needed to meet an expectation within myself more than anything else, and also collect the stuff that I liked most about that blues genre. And
guys, this is a new project I'm involved with, so if it sounds interesting to you, check it out and let me know what you think. If you're a musician, composer, artist, or songwriter, and you want to stop listening to all the bad news about how there's no more money to be made in the music business, and you want to instead start making some good economic news of your own, then check out this new free video training called Where the Money's Hiding in the Music Business in 2023. You can find it online at musicreboot.com, and this video shows you how to use your existing music and composing skills to create the financial stability you've always wanted.
So this, I hope I'm not going on a tangent, but I would like to. Okay, good. I want to kind of explain all the elements to it, and my favorite stuff about that genre of music would be like Bo Diddley. I mean, and he's sort of like rock and roll blues. Then I liked the really early Howlin' Wolf stuff that was recorded at Sun Studios in Memphis. Before things moved to Chicago, I thought it was like a little bit more raw. And on a lot of those recordings, there's no bass player. It's just drums, piano, Howlin' Wolf, and then Willie Johnson on guitar. And I sort of wanted to go for, even though it's a Jimmy Reed covers record, the reason why I chose Jimmy Reed is that those are the songs I like to sing the most. But really, it's not trying to do Jimmy Reed as Jimmy Reed. It's almost like using Jimmy Reed as a vehicle to try and get back to the early Howlin' Wolf records and throw some Bo Diddley in there. And if that makes sense, it was just sort of like take all the ingredients of the blues that I like. And I even went so far to, we don't know for sure what Willie Johnson used on those early Howlin' Wolf records, but from the photographs, a couple photographs, I think it was a Supro Ozark guitar that has a Vistatone pickup in it. And it was a particular sound, that pickup, through a small amplifier. So I was able to track down a Vistatone pickup and have one installed in a Telecaster. And then I kind of simulated Willie Johnson's guitar rig for the solos on that record. So it's kind of wild in the fact that, like, if you could make a cartoon of it, it'd almost be like Bo Diddley is playing the monochord, Willie Johnson is playing the guitar solos, Jimmy Reed is singing, you know what I mean? So it was just like, and I feel like Willie Johnson got a bad turn because there's a collection, like if anybody wants to search it out, just go to YouTube and type in Willie Johnson Electric. Now there's a blind Willie Johnson who is an acoustic blues guy he's way more famous than Willie Johnson. So, but Willie Johnson was playing on those early Howlin' Wolf records, and like predated the British invasion. Like you wouldn't believe, like it's the most distorted, saturated guitar sound. Like, I mean, it's more raw. It's almost like the guy has a fuzz pedal on. I mean, it is so raw. And I just feel like calling him Future Man or something like that, because everybody talks about Clapton and the Beano album with the Marshall and the Les Paul, which is amazing. I mean, it's a great sound.
Yes.
But Willie Johnson was doing this more aggressive, distorted thing in like 1953 or 1954, and kind of history just washes over him. Maybe because those recordings are not as cohesive as other stuff, or maybe it didn't make an impact culturally as much as like the British blues invasion did. But those are kind of the elements. And so I feel good in some ways where even if people don't check out my record or my music, I hope that they go to YouTube and just type in Willie Johnson, like electric guitar. And people have put playlists together so you can go there and just check out his guitar playing on those early Howlin' Wolf sides, and you're like, oh my goodness, it's almost like punk rock electric blues. I mean, I can't believe how raw it is, for that time period.
Well, you turned me on to that when you told me about that Wolf doc. Sorry, I'm sorry about that.
Yeah. No, sure.
You turned me on to that with that Howlin' Wolf documentary. Yeah,
exactly. And so that was the motivation. And honestly, I was the most nervous because I didn't know if this concept would work, because it's basically how the recording happened is I called up Jim. There was no rehearsals. I sent him some iPhone recordings of me playing the monochord and singing, and he was like, yeah, let's do it. And he doesn't need to rehearse that kind of material. So we just settled into the studio for 2 days, and I sat with the monochord, sang. He sat at the drum set. We were in the same room. We played live, and then we just recorded the album in 2 days. It was either first or second take. And then I hung around for a day playing solos, and then I did finished solos doing at a friend's place. So the guitar solos were overdubbed, but essentially the duo part of the recording was recorded live. And also, that's about it. There's no heavy overdubs in terms of percussion or anything. It's just drums, this low guitar, and then me overdubbing the guitar solos, and that was how the record was made. So it's pretty raw,
Thanks, man. It's you always have that sound. I have asked you 100 times. How do you get that distorted sound, Jim? And you tell me about your amps. Of course, it's just unique to you, but you always have that sound. That's one of the things I like about your guitar playing.
Yeah, and especially on that, people were asking me about what amp that is, and I mean, honestly, you can kind of get a 4 or 5 watt amp, and if you mic it correctly, it can sound like just ginormous, like how I did that. There's, it's like a 4 or 5 watt amplifier. You put a microphone on the amp, but then also, you put some ambient mics up, and all of a sudden it sounds way huge. It's way bigger than from the little amp that it is. So and then
Sure.
that way you don't really have to use pedals or anything like that. And it's almost, I mean, there are going to be some small amps that are better than others, but pretty much you can kind of get that sound from a small amplifier. But anything from the 50s or 60s, and so that's. But and also though, that Vistatone pickup is kind of a unique sound, and that pickup through a small amp, I felt like, is the thing that captured that vibe, if that makes sense.
Where did that Vistatone come from? Like, do you know where it was? What kind of a guitar it was on prior, or?
The first time I've seen it was on a National or a Supro Ozark, but it's a one pickup model. And it looks like, they call it like mother of toilet seat, that white pearl. It's a very, very small bodied guitar, and the neck, it's a pickup that attaches to the neck, and it looks like a humbucker. It's like the size of a humbucker, but actually it's a single coil in a plastic enclosure. And someone described it as being half Stratocaster, half P90. But I don't even know if that's adequate. It just kind of has this woofy, muscular tone where the corners are rounded on it. Like, there's nothing sharp about it. And sometimes small amps, they could have a high frequency, but I think maybe that's the fuzz aspect of it, where you're kind of putting this, but it's very, very powerful. It's about as powerful as a P90. So you're putting this powerful pickup that's maybe on the edge of being muddy through a really distorted small guitar amp, and all of a sudden the harmonics start coming out of it. It's pretty wild, So that's the story of the Vistatone. A couple people made copies of them. I think Roadhouse made a Vistatone pickup, and then he stopped making them. I think Supro, the modern day Supro, made some of those, but I don't know. I wanted an original one, and it took me a couple of years to find it, and maybe I paid $250 for it or something like that. But it ended up working out, because except maybe for one song I used a bridge pickup on something, but for the rest of the stuff, the whole album, all the solos are on that Vistatone pickup. So that's
and it sounds great.
And
where did you get that reverb?
That's added after, like in mixing, but a lot of the reverb actually was when I finished the solos at my friend's place. It was a very hard room, so it was really like this. The sound is bouncing off the walls and the floor. So with those two room mics, you're getting the reverb of the whole room, and so it's almost like you're not using the microphone.
Gotcha.
The microphone on the amp is in the mix, but also the room mics are really picking up the full, kind of muscular thing of it. So, it was interesting to kind of chase the dragon in a way, and in my own way try and find my way back to those sounds and those grooves, and I think it worked. But even Keltner in the studio, he was like, "So you're going to lay bass on this too?" And I was like, "No, I'm like, this is going to be just, kind of almost like garage rock in a way, where it's just, I just wanted to leave it as live and as raw as possible." And I think it came out good. I think it came out good.
Yeah, it came out great. What I asked you before, the internet's a little wonky. Oh yeah. Well, I think there's a delay here, but what I had said before is, did you get that pickup on reverb?
Yes. Oh, yeah. I didn't hear that. Yeah, I did get that pickup on reverb, and I haven't seen one since. To be honest with you, it was a kind of a rare find. Yeah. And I think
Yeah,
the time that
I've
a
never even heard
Supro
of it.
Ozark showed up, like, yeah, and then is it the Kills, that duo? You know, that band of the guy and the girl,
Yeah, I know.
Allison, I think her name
Yep.
is. He, you know who I'm talking about? He plays a Supro Ozark guitar.
It's
So if you wanted to see what, yeah, he plays one of those with the
okay. The
Vistatone
Kills.
pickup. It looks like a toy guitar in a way. So but if people were interested in seeing what that model looked like, you know, yeah.
This, as you mentioned, this was not your first time playing with Keltner, and I know he doesn't just play on anyone's records. How did you first connect with him? And I know you've always had special. What was special about the chemistry you guys shared initially? Because you've always, as long as I know you, that's been one of your best experiences.
Yeah, I mean, I've just been a fan of his drumming for my whole life, and I was teaching Paul Simon's son, and I would go to the house, and like one time before I started working with Paul Simon professionally, he was playing a show at Madison Square Garden, with Simon and Garfunkel, and they were like, "Hey, you want tickets?" And I was like, "Yeah, of course I want tickets." And so they hooked me up with these great tickets, and then Keltner was playing drums with Simon and Garfunkel, and then that was the first time I saw him live. And then I was able to go to another concert, and I was backstage, and I talked to the security, and I went in back of the stage, and there was like a staircase leading up to the stage. So I kind of sat on the staircase where no one in the audience could see me, but I had like a direct beeline to Keltner. And so I just kind of watched him play drums the whole Simon and Garfunkel show. And I'm just, just watching him move. It was just so cool. And I met him that night. He seemed like such a nice guy. And then when I had toured with Paul Simon my first year, I felt like I wanted to make a solo record. And I thought, oh, how cool would it be to make a trio record, with Keltner and Larry Goldings on organ. And my friend put me in touch with them. And then we just became friends. And when I played with Paul Simon from then on, every time we'd come through LA, I'd get Jim and his wife tickets to the Paul Simon show, and they'd come hang out. And so we stayed friends, and we just always it seemed like a nice chemistry where I just called him and he's like, yeah, sure. It wasn't, at that point, he's like, yeah, let's just do it. So that's how it happened.
Oh, that's cool.
It was like very matter of fact. Yeah.
Yeah. What's the you've done a lot of solo records. What's the most enjoyable thing for you when you're an artist playing on your own records versus when you're playing as a sideman?
I think that it's definitely a different experience. I think the solo records are actually way more stressful, even though it's enjoyable. But it's just the getting the mix right, getting the mastering right, and like the playing part of it is the most fun. And then hearing the music come together for the first time, but then mixing it and mastering it is just like a bear. It's just like, I feel like it's like fighting a grizzly bear, because it's just, especially in the modern day that we live in, there's so many options. Like you can approach mixing a record from like 14 million different ways. You can make it sound like the 1960s. You can make it sound like the 1970s. How retro do you want it to sound? How modern do you want it? So it's really, just trying to find the best way to find the mix that represents the music the best. So even though I think maybe the projects I play on with on my own stuff, it's just it's again, it's more stressful. Like when I made the records with Paul Simon, it's like, oh cool, all right, I'm interested to wait to see, I played on it, and then, oh, what will the record sound like when it comes out? Like, and sometimes I would hear some mixes and stuff like that, but it was more like, oh, cool, and then, but there's none of that fighting how the mix is going to be done and will I get the mastering right? Did I choose the right mastering guy? All that kind of, the I don't know how to describe it. I say it's, like birth pains or something like that, where it's just sort of, and then the other problem about it is working on something. It's almost like going into an art museum and trying to look at the painting from 2 inches away, and that's the other thing that happens where it's like, you can focus in on, oh my God, that note is driving me crazy. And then 2 years later you hear it and you don't hear what you were hearing. You can kind of get into this micromanaging the mix thing and whittling away at it to where you just suck all the life out of it, and so that's the main. I think making the solo records is more challenging. So in that way.
Yeah, you've always been pretty good though. Even though I know it's tough what you're saying, but you're pretty timely with your mixes and stuff. You don't. I guess it gives you stress, but when when to fish and cut bait.
Yeah. It's always like and it's funny. It's almost like the times when I know it's right is when it almost clicks emotionally, if that makes sense. Where all of a sudden it just goes like, oh yeah, that feels good. This is it. But trust me, there's like sleepless nights of like, oh my God, that guitar's too loud. I got to call the mix guy in the morning, and then I'll lose sleep over, like you would think that you'd be like, okay, go to sleep. First thing I do is call the mix guy, but then I'll obsess about calling the mix guy all night, if that makes sense, where it's like, it's like it needs to happen right now. And that's the, if that makes sense, that it's just neurotic. It's just, it's like crazy making a record. It just drives me crazy. And I feel like I can't focus on anything else. That's my only focus until it's done. So, and then I'm kind of wiped out after it. And then that happened this time, so, but that's, if that makes sense, that's the difference. To me, it's just it's more stressful, honestly,
That is literally the same answer that everybody that I've asked that question to gives. It's like everybody's like basically, oh my God, it's so much easier to be a side person, for the same reason.
Yeah, but then I will say this is that not with Paul Simon, but other people, sometimes the mix comes out and I go like, no, I thought the rough mix sounded better, like it, and a lot of times, like I played electric on one album, and when the album came out, there was just a little bit of electric on it, and they kind of had turned it into an acoustic record, and I was like, oh wow, okay, that, like it's just, you never know. You could play on a whole record, and then sometimes halfway through they choose to take the album in a different direction, and it's like, oh, I thought I was going to be on that record, but it's weird because I will say what was cool about working with Paul Simon and Phil Ramone was like, well, these guys are not going to screw up the mix, that was like a good, it was just like, well, I know when this comes out it's going to sound great, and it did. It sounded really great. So yeah.
Hey, I want to talk about a few of my favorite tracks on the new record. The Ain't That Lovin' You Baby.
Okay.
I like that one because first of all, I love to hear you sing, because even though we speak often, it's just a different context listening to you on records. And it's always, I don't know, it's just interesting to hear you sing we talk often, but your voice is different. The context is different, but this track I felt is also a great example of that awesome guitar tone that you get. And so I would just, I asked you a question earlier. I was going to ask you about how do you get the tone in the studio. You said with the low wattage amp, but I would encourage, if you're listening to this, check out that tune, Ain't That Lovin' You Baby, if you're looking for good guitar tone. I also like the title track
Yeah,
very much. I want to be
that's
loved,
actually
and
one of my
I thought it was
favorite tracks also.
I thought it was really cool. What's that?
Oh, I just said that was one of my favorite tracks also.
Oh, cool. The title track is great because I loved how Keltner like uses that crash cymbal at the beginning right after your guitar lines, and it's almost like the cymbal was the tail end of the actual guitar line, and I just thought it sounded so cool. And I was wondering if that's something you guys discussed, or or did that just come out naturally? Because to me, that's an example of something small really adding a ton of firepower musically.
Yeah, I think that's just the magic of Keltner, where it's almost like we go in and say, okay, like I'll just say, hey, I think this one was a shuffle, and that's pretty much all the direction I'd give him, or I'd say this is a backbeat, and then I'd play a little bit, and maybe I'd sing the drum groove to him of what I was hearing. And then whatever happened after that was just all him, So it was really kind of just, he's a magical guy. And again, when we made the record, he was 80 years old, and it's just amazing.
Incredible.
All the records that he played on, and I'm really just so thankful that I got a chance to record with him another time and just document, kind of, again, it's I mean, my other records, I'm not like exclusively blues, and people sometimes put me in the category of like a blues guitarist, but I feel like I'm more coming out of the traditional like Roy Buchanan, where it's that sort of meeting place of country, blues, a little bit of jazz, and I almost look at it like American music, but this was the one time where it's like, oh, this is specifically a blues record. And like when I was 12 years old, the other record that I really liked was it was an Albert Collins, Johnny Copeland, and Robert Cray record called Showdown. And that's still one of my favorite electric guitar
I know
records.
that record.
And it's a great record. And so it was almost like a thing of like, man, I've never done a straight up blues record. Let me do a straight up blues record, but then it's also like pretty left to center or a little bit avant-garde, because using this low guitar on it was a little bit taking a chance or whatever. But to me, again, that's what harkened back to the early Howlin' Wolf sides, where it's like, it's just not bass heavy. And somehow when the music moved from Memphis up to Chicago, the bands got bigger, and as the bands got bigger, then you needed more structure and framework within the music, and then that kind of made it less rural. Like the early blues stuff, the rural stuff is super wild, because if it's just a solo person, they can change chords whenever they want to change chords. And so to me, that early Howlin' Wolf stuff was, even though it was electric, it felt like half electric, half rural music. And again, that's kind of what the vibe that I tried to get back to on this thing, where it was just more experimental. And so that's the gist of it. So.
Well, I think you accomplished it, because it sounds very much like in that genre, that period. Another track that I really loved. And, oh, you're welcome. I think there's a delay. Sorry, Jim. Another track I loved,
it's okay.
and you talked about your monochord, was "Tell Me That You Love Me." And again, when we spoke, I said, "Is that a baritone?" And that's what you explained, the whole monochord. But talk about that track.
Yeah, that track is that's actually a voodoo rhythm, and I think we tried that as a shuffle, and then I just said, well, why don't we try this other groove? And like the voodoo rhythm goes bum 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 boom, bump, boom, boom, bump, boom, bump, boom, bump, boom, boom, bump, boom. It's like kind of a traditional Haitian rhythm. And I just thought it'd be cool to try it in this "Tell Me That You Love Me," the Jimmy Reed cover. But the monochord seemed to really speak in that track because there's a lot of space, and it almost sounds like a synthesizer or something like that. Where, and so that's basically not much more than that. It was just like, hey, and then I said that, hey, this is this rhythm, and Jim was like, yeah, okay, and that's cool. I mean, you just with Keltner, it's just like, hey, it goes like this, and then he just eats it up and does his Van Gogh painting around it. It's like it's really his drumming. He's really kind of a genius in how he plays and just how loose and free. And even though it's groove music or roots music, blues, he's almost playing it from a jazz drummer's perspective too, where it's this sort of rolling, interesting. Never plays the same thing twice type of thing, like stream of consciousness drumming or something like that. And it's amazing. Like I think there's two versions. I picked a certain, of I Want to Be Loved, but it's amazing. Even the differences between the takes of each one, they sound completely different. It's not like, each, it just happens in the moment, and it'll only happen that one time that way. And that's sort of the nature of the beast with him, and with that style of music also. So
yeah, I know you enjoyed that experience with him, Jim. Hey, so before we go, I just want to ask you this: you've had a ton of really cool musical experiences, and I was curious, like, what's the best musical advice you've ever been given, and who gave it to you?
It's a tough question to answer. Let me think. It's one of those things where I don't know if anybody ever sat me down and told me something, but I think it's more just through watching people around me. But I will say maybe the person that comes to mind is Phil Ramone. When I worked on that first record with Paul Simon, we would have lunch after we would record, and Paul would be working like in the control room, and then I'd have lunch with Phil Ramone. And I just asked him questions about recording, microphones, and he just gave me a ton of advice about recording. And one of the things that he said was, when it comes to recording live, to capture the sound the way you want it, so that way you don't have to EQ after or process it. It's really, he was huge on mic placement and just getting the sound going in. And so I always took, I think that was probably just something that has stuck with me when making my own recordings, is just trying to get the sound you want without having to manipulate it after the fact,
So like sharpen your axe, basically.
Yeah, well, I mean, I had a photographer tell me one time that he shoots to edit, and I thought that was like the worst thing I've ever heard in my life. Like, why would you want to shoot to edit? Like I want to shoot to capture the thing with minimal editing, post-production as possible, Yeah. And so, but that's also maybe like an old world pre-technology, or when technology was in its infancy, that, maybe that's that mindset, but that's what I would like to stay with, where it's like, you want to capture something when it's happening and with as little filters on it as possible. So that, I guess that's the thing that, if that's the first thing that came to mind when you asked that question, then I think that is the probably the best advice musically I've been given from someone.
Capture the sound up front, from Phil Ramone. Yeah, that's it's interesting you mentioned photography, because that's a hobby of mine, is photography. And I don't know if I ever told you that. I see all these beautiful pictures online, and they're heavily saturated and a lot of work in post-production.
Yeah.
And maybe it's because I don't have that capacity. Like, I don't have the time to sit and learn that stuff today. but I always want to get the nice shot up front. It's exactly what you're saying. I don't want to worry about, I want to get the lighting right, but most importantly, the right shot up front, and then it's done. So.
And it's sort of like the world, we live in a world of sort of Instagram filters in a way where, I can having a coffee and a cigar right now, and if I took the picture with my phone, it wouldn't look that interesting, but then you throw a filter on it, and it's not to say that you don't want to maybe dirty up a signal or add a little saturation, but I mean, it's just a thing where I just feel like I want to stay with the old world art of it, as opposed to like, let's fix it in post-production and get the scalpels out. And, it just doesn't seem right,
I totally agree with that, man.
And also way more work,
Yeah.
I mean,
and that's the stuff. Yeah. I was saying that's the stuff that like, there's no end to that. When you lay down this sound, you're done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, there's a Leica camera I wish I could get. It's just a dedicated black and white camera, but that glass that they have is Leica glass is really, there's something about that, and I was comparing images, and it's one of these days I'll get around to it, but it'll probably just sit on the shelf if I did get it.
A Leica camera?
Yeah, there's one in particular. I forget which one it is, but it's a dedicated black and white. It's a digital one, but it's a dedicated black and white. And I just thought it was cool.
It's funny. I have this little Ricoh here, and most of the time I shoot in black and white with it. I mean, I could shoot in color and then again flip the switch, but I like to catch the grainy sort of. I'm doing street photography, so I kind of like, I think that's better for me.
Sure.
And let's close this interview out with the same question, only this time about life in general. What's the best life advice you've ever been given, and who gave it to you?
Okay. Boy, this is, I need to drink more coffee before these questions. This is, I think it's, I think, maybe it's the best advice, but it's also the hardest advice, where it's like, I try and work on myself and just try and do positive changes and, look for old patterns that don't work and try and eradicate those old patterns. And a really good close friend said to me, he says, you start doing that and sometimes you have to leave people in the dust. And like, it's almost like when you start making changes for the better, or you want to leave old patterns, not everybody's going to be on board with that. And sometimes either relationships fall apart, or you just have to leave things that I never thought I'd have to leave. But it's a choice between like myself or my own sanity, or just kind of staying in the mud. And that was probably the best but hardest advice, but it's also the truest advice that I've ever been given, where it's unfortunately, when I, it's just almost like, hey, if you're go to the bar every night and you're drinking and you have friends that are drinking and then you want to stop drinking, you know what I mean? It like, not all those people are going to be out. You're going to have to find some new friends basically. But that's just a pretty clear example, but I'm even talking more like emotionally, or just thinking patterns, and just that's tough, because it's like it's tough to almost have to choose yourself over things that don't work. It seems like there's a price tag attached to wanting to better yourself, and I guess that's his point. But you know what? There's also a price tag to staying like in negativity forever. There's a huge price tag for that too. So, I think that's the best probably life advice,
Dude, that's awesome. The good thing is you're hearing a lot more people coming out with stuff like that now. I don't think it makes it any easier to do that, but it makes it probably more accepting, for people who don't maybe have the confidence to do that, or like, but everybody, professionals now are giving you that as advice.
Yeah, like if you, back maybe in the 50s, if you saw someone to talk about, a psychologist or psychiatrist, that, there was a stigma attached to it, or or if somebody had trouble with drugs or alcohol, it was like, now it's just like, you know, even I think some corporate jobs, like they'll like, oh, just go to rehab. You know what I mean? They'll like work with you on it, as opposed to like you're a leech on society or something like that. You know, the harsh treatment. But yeah, I mean, I think too is just just more like even just emotionally or just people that are, I don't know. It's like that show. What We Do in the Shadows. Did you ever see that? There was a movie and then there's a show on Hulu. It's the funniest show I've ever seen. But in the television show, it's about real vampires living together. But there's one guy who's a psychic vampire or an emotional vampire. So he doesn't drink blood, but he just wears people down. You know, and
I think we've all had those toxic those vampires in our life. Yeah,
that's right. So it's almost like, you know, it's just tough to. I have this childlike view of the world where I want there to be togetherness, and I don't. You know what I mean? I want everything. I want there to be a spirit of unity
world
and
peace.
Have it. Or just to like, man, and then it's just like, you know, it's tough. I guess it's just tough. Doing the right thing or what you feel is the right thing. It's just tough to do that. And that was the advice attached to that, you know, so that's, I guess, how to cap off that question.
I think that's a great answer. I love what you said. I wrote it down here. There's a price attached to trying to better yourself, and there's a price attached to not trying to better yourself.
I mean, right. Like you might not have to go through feelings of abandoning people or them abandoning you, but in the long run, you know, you might be paying a higher price tag by not willing to go and deal with those uncomfortable emotions. You know, in the long run, you'll be, because time is finite, and just how quickly it seems like the older you get, the quicker the time goes, and it's hard to constantly be aware of it, but it's like, this is like a temporary journey here, and I don't want to waste what time I have left, you know.
Yeah, I always say there's many decisions, and I think this falls into that category. When the pain of not doing something is finally greater than the pain of doing it or just allowing it to exist, that's when people generally tend to take action. And that's fair enough, you know?
Fair enough. Yeah. I mean, because it's, you know, and that's the sad thing is that it's, you know, I think the pain is more acute when you take the action, because then people's masks come off, and it's like, you know, it's almost, I don't know, maybe like a cell phone plan. You're going to pay either way. You have to pay to get out of the plan, but if you stay in it, you're going to have to pay more, you know?
A lot more. A
lot more. So I think that's the same thing emotionally, you know? It's like, it's just a cell phone plan, you know?
I like that. Hey, I want to talk to people about your new record, I Want to Be Loved. You got a special offer for sale. Do you want me to promote it, or do you want to talk about it? What do you prefer?
Sure. Well, I'll tell you about it real quick, and then if I miss something, you could point. You know, if I missed an important point. Well, the album is available everywhere for streaming. You know, like, so you can listen to the record anywhere. But one of the things that I thought would be cool this time around, and it only happened after post-production, where we had all this video from the studio and then video of me doing overdubs. And then in recent years, there's all this stuff cropping up online of isolated tracks, like John Bonham's isolated tracks from Led Zeppelin, or, you know, Motown without the vocals on it. And since this record was made, it's like half live, but then the solos are overdubbed. Or I should say the record is live, but, you know, just because it's a duo record, I overdubbed the solos. So I thought, well, how cool would it be to offer the record with no solos on it? So if guitar players wanted to use it as a play along, they could. Release the record again and this is all part of this deluxe package, the album without the drums. So you have everything but the drums. So if a drummer wanted to play along to it. And then the third thing is having the isolated solos without the tracks. So if you heard a lick, sometimes, you hear a lick or something and it's hard to hear exactly what the person's doing because, it gets meshed into the track. So I thought it'd be cool to just release the solos, without the background track. So you could just hear everything clearly if somebody wanted to transcribe it. And then this weird instrument that I kind of came up with called the Monochord. There's a video that goes into detail about the tuning and the pickups, and then about 20 minutes of just cell phone footage. But it's fun to see with me and Jim Keltner in the studio playing live, and then about 20 minutes of me doing solo overdubs. And then you also get the files for the full album also. So I just thought it would be an interesting. A lot of people have wrote to me saying they like the record, and maybe it's a way to go a deeper dive into the record if someone likes it. But then also, it's also a nice way to support me as an artist because there's no money in this streaming stuff, and
none.
It kind of it just helps me out a little bit to continue to make records in the future. So and so far. I've heard back from people and they thought it was well worth it. And, like the package is like 7.5 gigs of content. And it just seemed fun to kind of put it into this cohesive thing. And again, just the other night, I needed to practice and I was like, I pulled it up and I was like, man, this is so much fun. Cause now I get to play to that record and I have my play along of the record that I just made, and I can still practice over it. So, and so this is the first time I've ever done anything like this, and it was a little scary to do. It just felt weird, but it also, I feel lucky enough to have played with Keltner a couple of times in the studio, and he's like one of the best, if not one of the best drummers in the world, and people. If they wanted to just hear even his drumming without the solos, it's a way to study his drumming more. So depending on which vantage point you look at it from, it could be used for personal use only, obviously, but it's nothing was changed in the album, but it's just different vantage points and you can kind of zoom in on it and then see content that's not available anywhere else. So that's basically the deluxe package.
Right on. So let me tell people where to get that, and I'll just summarize it again. It's go to Jim Oblon, OBLON.net, JimOblon.net, and it's right there on the homepage. The new album is I Want to Be Loved. And again, it's only $30. You get a ton of stuff. You get the isolated tracks of the rhythm section, the song with the drums removed, and you get the guitar solos isolated. You also get some video footage of Jim Oblon and Jim Keltner in the studio and Jim doing his solos, kind of like behind the scenes. And you get a video on the Monochord, which is a very cool instrument. Which he plays, you'll hear it on the album. And he goes into what it is and how he put it together and tuning and pickups. And also you get the files for the full album with it, of course. And again, that's at JimOblon.net. And so check it out and grab that while you can. Any final words of wisdom, Jim?
I would just say that that again, I made this as sort of like a love letter to all the stuff that I loved about that early rock and roll and early blues stuff. Right when it moved from rural to electric. So I would say if people, not only I hope that people enjoy this record that I made, but the things that we talked about in this interview, if people haven't gone back and investigated that early Howlin' Wolf stuff, I hope that they go and, check out that early stuff and then go back to listening to Bo Diddley a little bit more and go back to listening to Jimmy Reed a little bit more. So in my own way, it's a tip of the hat to those guys. Obviously, I didn't want to try and recreate what they did. It's impressionistic. It's a pretty left of center take on the blues, but it's definitely a tip of the hat to those guys. And in my own way, just trying to keep that thing alive, or keep the spirit of it alive. So I just like people to maybe check out the album and then listen to Bo Diddley, Howlin' Wolf, and Jimmy Reed more. So there you go.
Right on. Thanks, Jim. All right, everybody, thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed it, please share it on your social media channels with your friends. We appreciate your support. I want to thank Jim Oblon very much for coming back on the show. Again, go to jimoblon.net, OBLON, and check out his new record and check out the deluxe package he's put together. And most important, remember that happiness is a choice, so choose wisely. I actually got a negative comment about that. I've had like thousands of positive comments about that, and somebody finally managed to to give me a like, how do you say something negative about it? All right, be fucking miserable if that's your preference.
No, that's when you get into your Ferrari of health. That's one of the people, unfortunately, you have to leave in the dust. You know?
Yeah, he was like, you missed the point. He's telling me, I'm like, it's not, I didn't miss it for me. I might have missed it for you, but like, that's okay. It doesn't make you a bad person, but leave me alone. Be nice, go play a guitar and have fun. Until next time, peace and love, everybody. I am out, brothers.